Yeah, I'm Patrick McGrath. I'm a product lead of June's Journey at Wooga. I've been in gaming for 8 years, and I've been lucky enough to spend that entire career with companies that business models were based on free-to-play. So even starting at NCSoft back in when MMOs were the thing, they were doing free-to-play. So one of the things I noticed is that there was a lot of fundamental similarities in the way people approached liveops, but they all had their different takes. And so hopefully I've distilled that down and you guys can walk away with a couple frameworks that make it much easier to identify gaps and needs. But first, I want to go through kind of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to get you up to date on June's Journey because I reference it quite a bit and the way that we used it in June's Journey. So you guys will essentially be masters of the game within 1 minute. Then I'll talk about user life cycles, compulsion loops, and then how putting those together actually yields the real benefits. So going into June's Journey, it is a story-driven hidden object game. I'm assuming many of you do not know June's Journey because our main demographic is 50-plus-year-old women. And I don't see too many out here. So as I said, it's story-driven, so we have lots of drama and mystery. And June goes through this story with her friends, kind of being a detective sleuth person that just kind of plays by her own rules. The core gameplay is hidden objects, so we have a number of objects that we ask you to find in the scene, and as you find them, we replace them. So if you hit that hippopotamus down by the tree, another item would show at the bottom, another item name would show at the bottom. And you have to find 15 of these to complete the scene, and depending on how quickly you do this, you get bigger rewards. And to finish off the core loop, we have an island. Yay, building things. So you get these rewards, you come to your island, you build all the decorations. This is what gives you the flowers that you see here in the top corner that allow you to progress. So now that you're all masters of June's Journey, I can tell you that we are on all major mobile platforms, so go download it, especially with your Kindle Fires. Just kidding. And we're also on browser via Facebook. So now getting to the nitty-gritty. The first framework is about player life cycles, and the way that we approach this at Wooga is through the hierarchy of competence. And so essentially what this is, at the bottom, it's people don't know that they don't even know something. That's how competent they are. And at the top, it's you're so competent at something that you can turn your mind off and you just go through the emotions. And a great example of that is we all have commutes. And for those that are commuting in London, that first time trying to get somewhere new can be stressful, and you're taking the wrong train in the wrong direction. Your 100th time, much better. Maybe some mistakes here or there. Your 1000th time, like you see these people reading books, just not even looking up, just from the sound of the train, they know which train is theirs. They've just mastered that because they've gone through this so many times. They're hyper competent at their own commute, which, yeah. So the way that we look at this is get rid of all the text and turn it on its side because it's much easier to look at. And then we just have our basic player life cycle, which I would note that this is not representative of the time that a player would spend in game. Just FYI, like a early game should not be 3 times larger than the Fatui. Really, your data should tell you what players and their behaviors develop depending on how this looks. But this, you can actually split this up in many different ways because this is the very macro level. And the next, like if you just took it down one more layer, would be looking at engagement and monetization, because the player behavior And the way that you would approach this for engagement is different than monetization. And many of us that are in live games, you know that players spend differently earlier in the game as they would later in the game. So trying to map this out, and depending on how sophisticated you are and what kind of segmentation and personalization, this really starts to splinter out, because then you have a player type A through Z for each one of these, and we're not going to get that complicated. For this talk, we're really going to stick with engagement, because I believe engagement is core to monetization, because you're not going to monetize people that don't enjoy playing your game. So that brings us to our second framework, which is compulsion loops. And I know talking at work, there are some people that just don't like the word compulsion. It just doesn't have a nice ring in their ears. But I mean, from a scientific standpoint, like compulsion loops, it's just the irresistible urge to do something or behave a certain way. And this is what we want to get players to do in our games. This is why we're developing the behavior early in the Fatui, have feature unlocks so they don't develop the wrong behaviors too soon. And really, the way this looks in gaming is just all the loops working within themselves and looking like this toilet flushing or router symbol. But the easy way to look at this is you spread this out, and much easier is actually just make it all the same size. And what you have is you go from second to second compulsion loops all the way to long term. Now, second to second in June's Journey, which is a hidden object game, there's how it works. You tap on these objects, you're getting real-time feedback. The points are escalating, the bonus bars creating urgency. It's also going up as you find items. There's different ways to do this. I mean, hidden object requires a certain amount of concentration and skill. So we can't do the Candy Crush and Peggle fireworks everywhere, because we actually have to allow the player to play the game. But you really want that to be fun. The next is minute to minute. This is just kind of the single game and reward loop. This is where the player gets done with their multiple second to second actions, gets done with something, now it's feeling exciting again, right? All the points are going up, your rewards are coming down and being collected. You're going up the leaderboard, or since I was playing, I was not going up the leaderboard. Yeah, so that's minute to minute. And then the session is essentially your core loop, right? This is the reason why you designed the core loop the way it is. So people start, and by the end of it, are completing that loop. In June's Journey, as I explained, you play scenes, get the rewards, go build on your island, get the flowers, progress through the game. Now, the next ones are really where LiveOps kind of takes off, because it's the daily, weekly, and long term. This is where the gameplay itself is leveraged in a way that gives you these clear goals based on that incremental gameplay. So for June's Journey, we have classifieds, which we'll go into later, and this is our task-based system, which we have a session daily and weekly component to this. Of course, you have events which can take care of almost all of this, depending on how you want to leverage that and how many different types of events you have in your game. So moving forward, we're just going to go with what we would call the core four, because your second to second and minute to minute naturally wrap into your session, because the session requires you to engage with the core loop. And honestly, if your second to second and minute to minute is not good, your game is not good. I'm sorry. It's you got more to fix than just live ops issues, right? So moving on, we're actually going to put these two together and see how we can leverage it. And I'll give an example of how we did this in June's Journey. And I do want to note that it's best when you can use this with KPIs, but you don't need to. So just for an example, on June's Journey, we had an average 3.6 sessions and 22 gameplays, right? So that's about 6 gameplays per session. And since it's already red, you're probably thinking it's not good, which it is not, because we give the player 12 free max gameplays. So obviously we're having a problem here, and trying to understand why, we can go to our 2 frameworks. And so one thing that we wanted to look at was early game, because this is something where when you're creating this behavior, you want to go as early as possible. We thought the Fatui was too early because you're still trying to teach the basics. So now that we're looking at early game, we add in the compulsion loops, and then you have something that looks like this. Although I didn't actually put our feature set, but this gets the idea across, because this was our initial feature set. Now, obviously, you can already see the gaps. So the next step is just identifying the needs, which this makes it very easy. Got a couple small bins there. These are the liveops needs. And because we're talking about early game, we can deprioritize long term. And now this is where we go to our trusty feature backlog. And if you don't have this, my God, please get one. Because this is something where we aggregate all our features, score them, do the cost-benefit analysis, and really the way that we do it on June's Journey is this is open to the entire company. So we have about 300 features in our backlog that we can always just pull from. And so the way that looks like, or did look like, was us pulling daily login, challenges, and events. Now, because of the costing and the way that the team was working, we decided to really prioritize challenges, because it fits so much of what we need. And I mean, we were working in parallel with events. But to explain how we did this with challenges, I'll just quickly explain that challenges is the task-based system that tries and reinforces the core loop. You see here that there are 3 tasks and a star box. So how we tried to hit multiple compulsion loops is we had one balanced to a session, we had one balanced to a daily reward, and then we had one balanced to 2 to 3 days. And then we had that meta prize. So as you're finishing these tasks, this score, or these little coins, go up and aggregate for your weekly prize. And so how did it work? Well, it worked really well. I mean, these are not massive numbers, but anyone that's tried to make an impact on retention or engagement, with it being long-term and sustainable, knows that, it's the incremental wins. That's what you really can count on. But as you notice here, there's a little ad watch. And obviously, as I said before, you'd prioritize engagement over monetization. There's a reason why. Because just with this feature, right, our IAP bookings went up almost 20%. Obviously, video impressions going up 50% and video revenue going up 50% is very obvious. We added another placement that was more repeatable. But I think this is where you can start to put these 2 frameworks, identify needs, and then if you're approaching just feature design from a compulsion loop standpoint, you can start hitting multiple compulsion loops that really impact the bottom line. Because there's no way that we'd see these numbers if we didn't have something that was tightly integrated within itself and the core loop that had people getting, meaningful rewards from session to weekly range. So, to wrap this up and allow people with any type of questions, because I always get tons of questions about all of this, I just want to say that the biggest takeaways, please approach player life cycles in a macro and micro way. Prioritize engagement over monetization. Of course, this really depends on where you're at as a company, where you're at as a game. But for me, engagement always pans out from a monetization standpoint. And then just add in compulsion loops, because just even having that mindset of how to get a player to engage from even just second to long term, it's just so vital. And a lot of this is just so intuitive, and we all think about it, but it really reminds me to like 5th grade math, where the teacher says, show your work, right? I mean, this is just like, show your work. And it really identifies, the gaps that you could have in your product. So with that, I'll wrap up and take any questions that anyone has.
So you said at the start of the talk that you're on the mobile platforms and Facebook.
Yep.
How important is it for you to be on like my platforms and specifically Facebook as well as the mobile platforms?
I mean, for us, it was, for the last 18 months, we've been on a pretty massive growth trajectory. I think Facebook was a big part of that. I mean, it represents a good portion of revenue. I mean, most people would not say no to 10% more, right? Like, so for us, it was just a no-brainer.
So when you, how do you test all of that, right? So you have all of these core loops, and eventually you want to try out the small one, the longer one. So will you create segmentation? Will you only target one country? So how do you leverage this? Because I can imagine that some core loops in the East versus the West or in Europe behave entirely differently, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a big piece of the user behavior, right? Like if we went to Asia, it would have to be very different. So how we test it is, certainly, I mean, everything that you said, like we segment on country, even just the way that we do our A/B tests is very methodical, because we just can't drop this stuff in the US, which represents far too large a portion of our revenue, because it's nice to stand up here and say, 18% increase here and 50%, but boy, there's a lot of skeletons in the closet that it's negative 10%, and you don't want to do that in the US. You want to do that in Turkey or in Russia. No offense, I mean, these are growing markets and they were great for us, but I mean, it's just the portion of revenue that you're talking about is tens of thousands of dollars a day. So for us, it is country-based, and then even just the way that Google allows you to kind of scale up to users on any release has been very helpful.
And will you target your user acquisition based on those loops as well?
We try. I mean, that's the short answer. We do have some tracking that we try and make lookalikes from some of this user behavior that we're developing. And lately, because we have had so many changes, we have noticed the impact in UA, so we're working a lot closer with UA on release and testing these types of features, because the earlier it is, like we were just looking at early game, like I said, any type of impact, like we just did a test on a sale very early in the game, and our UA got crushed. And so for 2 weeks, they're sweating, and they didn't realize that we were doing this A/B test. And so it was a lot tighter communication. But to answer your question, yes, UA is definitely.
Do you find there's ever a point when it's too late to teach a player the compulsion loops? Or can you, if you've got a day 180 player, you can still teach them these old loops?
So a D180 player would technically have to learn new loops. Like say, we released challenges probably a year from when we went into soft launch. And so there was a lot of D360 players that had to relearn how to play, going to this challenges within the session, multiple times a day, getting weekly prizes. So I don't think that it's ever too late. And through design, we really think about how the player is going to have to change their behavior, and we try and ease that.
All right, good. So then we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so
Nice.
much, Patrick.